Welcome to setting up an organized workflow. I'm going to be tethering a Phase 1 XF camera with an IQ3 100 back, and we're going to be using the USB 3 cable tethering into a late generation MacBook Pro with a solid state drive in it. And the solid states are very important for the capture speed that you're able to maintain, especially when you're using high bandwidth capture like a 100 megapixel back. To start with, I like to have Capture One running already. The only thing running right now is beneficial. I don't want any side programs running. So tether into the computer, tether into the back, and fire the camera up. And as soon as the digital back comes online, it's going to show up on my screen, and I have access to the camera settings through this conduit. Now, the USB 3 cable is a huge improvement over USB 2, over FireWire 800, especially over FireWire 400. There's 5 gigabits of transfer speed that comes through this cable. That allows live view to work really well with both medium format cameras and 35 millimeter cameras. It allows full transference of the files very quickly, so you don't run into buffer problems. And you also have access to layers and layers of data from the camera if the camera is providing that. To start with, here is the new session. It's unpopulated with any images as of yet. I can capture from the camera, or I can capture from the computer to get my first shot. So this time I'm going to capture from the camera. Image comes in. I have full access to changing all of the camera settings, including the ISO, any exposure details, whether the mirror is up or down if I'm needing to reduce vibration. I can change the file format. I can go into live view. All of this is initiated from the Capture One conduit. I can check battery status of the camera itself, the back, the shared power, which this system provides, that it does power sharing. So if the battery's running low in the back, the camera will provide some power to the battery until you can get a fresh one in there. And the whole system stays up while you exchange batteries. You can also do white balance setting here, which is handy because if the back is set to a different white balance than what you're ultimately using, you've got images flowing in, and if you've got a client watching and they're seeing the images come in, they'll see it come in blue and weird and then correct in the software. It's easier to set the white balance correct the first time, and then when each image comes in, you're seeing closer to an accurate representation of where it renders out to versus it taking time to correct for a setting that you've got wrong on the camera and then correcting it back. Now, of course, this is in a raw workflow, so there's no files. You can get your file back. You can have, the only things that matter are focus and shutter speed and aperture as for what's going to be in your shot and the lighting you provide to it. Everything else, the tint and the lighting, or the tint and the color temperature, any of those nuances are all changed on the fly here and in a non-destructive way. So once we have Capture One open and the camera's been recognized, we want to make sure that we have a naming convention that suits what's going to happen during our shoot. And I like using something that's specific to the day, but then also is bound by some of the more meta kind of data that says, in this case, I'm using Capture One's tokens to place in the current date, and then it's also going to grab the counter from the camera, so it'll actually grab the shot count off of this digital back, and that'll allow us not to have any overlaps of a file naming or anything. We can always rename as it becomes appropriate. But that's best taken care of back in the studio when you don't have the elements of the location shoot or the busyness of the tethered shoot in your way. So when you look at this dialogue, the next capture location is an important dialogue because it's telling you how much space is left on your computer, which is good. I've got this drive is pretty well clean. I'm shooting right now to my desktop. The default position for Capture 1 to Capture 2 is lodging a folder for this session in the Pictures folder. You can put it anywhere you want. Capturing to the internal drive is the best case because when you're flowing all this data through this cable, you've got more than one USB port on this computer, but you've only got one USB bus. And if you busy the bus with the hard drive, an external hard drive, especially if, say, the Apple system is going to try to start indexing that hard drive for Spotlight to find files in, it's going to put too much data across that transmission and you might get slower captures. And it's not going to be fragmented or anything, but it's not ideal. So shooting to the internal drive on the computer, so making sure that your laptop is full and clean and ready to take the entire contents of the shoot that you're about to start is important. Of course, having a backup drive, very important. I like to back up between sets. So the moment I'm moving from one shot to the next, have a program running like Carbon Copy Cloner that immediately recognizes that I've plugged the external drive in, knows that because I've set up ahead of time which folder I want to clone, and takes care of that for me while I'm busying myself, changing the camera, changing the set. Then eject that drive and then move on to the next shot. When we look back at this conduit also, the next capture adjustments is a very important control panel. The ICC profile comes in from Capture 1. It recognizes what camera is attached to it. In the case of Phase 1 cameras, and actually now in the case of all cameras, it's internally created profile for the camera. So the color settings and everything, the way it's going to display in this environment has been created by the color engineers at Phase 1. The most important line item in here is this copy from last. Copy from last means whatever you do to the image that you've got highlighted on the screen, whether it is an adjustment to the exposure, a change to the saturation, the moment you shoot the next shot, what you've set in that dialogue is going to get copied to the next. Now this sometimes works against you if you haven't noticed that you've made a change, or if someone has touched the computer that wasn't supposed to be touching it in the middle of your shoot. So you can always, Command R is always the quick way to revert any shot back to there being zero augmentation to it. So that's the quickest and easiest way to make sure that, oh, that's my shot. Because you don't want to have an exposure setting of +2 built into here, and then you're underlighting everything on set because you didn't realize that everything was having a +2 applied to it as you were shooting, and you were lighting for something that was 2 stops underlit. I like also setting up this quick tab for specifically what I need to see during a shoot. This is a tab that you, with a control click, you can add a tool tab. And so I added quick to this earlier. What's amazing and wonderful about Capture 1 is while you have all of these different tab settings up at top here, every single one of them can be customized to what each of those contains. So if you don't like the order and the progression, you can completely create a custom layout that suits you for when you are on location shooting, in the studio shooting. So whether you have one set up for if you're doing compact flash based imports, you have a different workspace saved for doing tethered capture to a laptop. If you had a larger screen, or you have another screen to plug into this, if you're in a studio environment, You can have a custom workspace set for that. And so you have these settings set exactly to what makes your life easy as a photographer to get the most relevant data on your screen and not see anything else. When shooting tethered capture, I prefer shooting to a session versus shooting to a Capture One library. The session is an easier file structure to peer into if you need to grab a single file, if you need to process some files out on the fly. It also keeps the files simply navigatable through the Finder. And so you can grab that raw file, drop it on a hard drive. If somebody needs the raw file, you can do a process and know exactly where it is. In a library, it's all nested within the library itself, and if you need to go after an actual file or some level of corruption happens during your shoot, if it's lodged in that library, it provides an extra couple layers of things you need to do to recover that file or be able to see that shooting session. That shooting session is best served by shooting into the session-based workflow. It's easy, it's simple, you can always bring that session into a catalog later, but the session is nice because it's logically about what you're doing at that time. Okay, so let's take a look at what I'm talking about. In the Finder itself, this exists as a very simple file structure. I had set this session up to go to my desktop. I have a capture folder, an output folder, a selects folder, and a trash folder. When you trash a file in Capture One, it goes into the trash folder, so you no longer have to see it in your capture sequence. So whether that's some of your just tests in between that you just don't want to see, and also don't want to take the time to put into a test folder or anything, you don't need them, they can go straight to trash. There is one destructive command key to delete, and it absolutely deletes. It's gone. It's not going into your trash. It actually vaporizes from the session, and so that should be used only when you're calm and you know what you're doing and you want to get rid of a certain set of files, because perhaps you're running out of hard drive space and you really just want to get them off of there fast. But it is destructive. They will be gone. So within the structure, in the Finder, you'll see that there's the IIQ files. These are the raw files that I'm shooting off of this camera right now. And within the capture folder, there's this nested folder that says Capture One. And this is where the settings for this session is. And this is where the cache files, so all the previews that it's building out. What's important to note when you're doing a tethered session, or actually any session in Capture One, is that you're rendering previews appropriate for the size that you're viewing them. Right now, I have a lot of space used by my side panel. I've got these thumbnails really big. If I'm looking at just the image and I hit Command B just to get rid of the browser section of it, and so I don't see the thumbnails, this is the active part of the screen that is the preview. I'm not previewing the entire window, I'm previewing this. So the pixel count, when you go into your preferences, should be based on the size of this window, not the total size of the screen. This becomes really important when you have Retina displays that have lots of pixels across the screen. You don't want to have your processor spending the time rendering out all of those pixels for the entire screen when actually you've got a smaller window. So a good way to determine how big that window is to do a screenshot. So if you do Command-Shift-4 on a Mac, it brings up the little crosshair along with the orientation of the window you're about to draw. And when you drag across it, it gives you the pixel count of that window. So you can bring this up in preview, hit Command-I, and it shows me that the image size is actually only 1940 pixels across of the window that I'm using. it's always best to have Capture One set to a pixel size that's only slightly bigger than what you're using. You don't want it to have to render up every time. If it makes a pixel count that's too small, then it renders a preview, and then it re-renders the preview because you have a screen size that exceeds the pixel count for the preview. So you want it to be a little bit bigger, but not much. So in this case, 2048 is a good setting. 2560 was the default, and that's basically 500 extra pixels that I'm having to render and then size down for this preview. So this is a processor saving setting that, again, as your session gets large, as you're shooting a lot, it matters. It matters that you achieve these little successes in optimization. So that same file structure that we were looking at in the Finder is the same file structure you see in the session folder in Capture One. So here's my capture folder, and I've only captured 2 images so far just now, so there isn't anything in the selects folder trash output. So if I bring my browser back and I see that I've got these images here, I'm going to go ahead and Command K, capture one more image, just to populate this a bit more, and show that, okay, so here's the one that I had tweaked around. Say this was actually the way it looked and we don't like this anymore. So you can drag this thumbnail over to the trash if you're a drag and drop kind of person. It gives you a warning because you actually are physically moving the file on the hard drive, unlike a catalog where you're moving it virtually from a smart album or into a different album. You are actually physically moving this from the capture folder now into the trash folder. And that's a good place to lodge your trash. I like keeping all the trash until I know that there's just nothing useful in there, and that usually happens after the shoot, after everything's been backed up. So even when I make that decision, it's non-destructive ultimately because I have a backup drive that already has it on there. And from the sense of backup drive, I really like backup drives that have 2 drives in them. That way you've got it's running in a RAID 1, which is a mirrored RAID. So all the data that flows out to that drive is being mirrored between 2 drives. This is less of a problem with solid state. Before, when you have older drives that are platter based, again, if something happens, if that drive gets jolted, you can lose data. And I don't like losing data ever. So, double redundancy, triple redundancy when it comes to your files. Really easy in a pre-pro to set your computer up with some kind of a backup utility that you plug in, it backs everything up, and then you eject that drive, because then it's in a safe state. It's not powered. It's perhaps even removed from set, especially if you're working with things that could damage that drive. So that's good safety. So here in the session folder, there's that item I've moved to the trash. Output folder we haven't used yet because we haven't processed anything out, but the output folder would be when we make use of the process recipes. If I were to process this file out right now, I would be processing out an 8-bit TIFF that would be in the Photoshop Adobe RGB space. The output location is noted where it's going, which is the output folder. You can send this out to a Dropbox if you wanted to. You can make these files immediately available based on how you set this up. But again, simple is easy. This file structure is very nice for just knowing where your entire shoot is, your selects, your ratings, your trash. And at the end of the shoot, then you can more move to the post-processing side of this, the more retouching side of Capture One. Right now, we're all about getting all the information from here into here and having that be organized and safe. All right, so right now, I've turned live view on, and this is the dialogue. And what's nice about the live view is the ability to see at 100% in real time So I'm going to manual focus on the camera, and you can see that the response is amazing. It's very fast. I can nail critical focus. This is 100% on a 100 megapixel file. But this is pretty processor demanding for the computer. I can hear the fans spooling up right now. This is something that if you don't have AC power, you got to mind how many times that you're going into live view on a camera like this if you don't have some sort of external battery power like a Hyperjuice or something that's going to give you more battery capacity that is internal in a MacBook Pro. If you close out of live view, now the camera has kicked back out of live view, and you can start shooting. You can go back into live view. As I said before, you can set the white balance within the camera itself. So now I've changed the white balance to this gray patch on the wall. And instead of now when I'm shooting that, if I had changed the white balance in the program, it would still come in from the camera slightly wrong, and then the software would make the change. Now I've made the white balance at the camera level, so now when I shoot, the moment it shows up in the program, it has already applied that new white balance to the scene. So it's just one layer of rendering that you don't have to watch happen. So if you're only glancing at it while you're in a busy shoot, you're not being distracted by it kicking color temperature every time as it processes from the initial thumbnail that comes off of the camera, and that's what first populates the window in Capture One until Capture One can grab it and make a preview of it. So this USB 3 setup is the most desired setup for tethering your camera to your computer. You can get very decent lengths. This is a 15-foot cable. It tethers well with no additional boosters typically necessary. The MacBook Pros are very good with their external bus power, so better than iMacs, better than a MacBook. So if you're looking for good throughput, good bandwidth, these MacBook Pros are awesome. Now, if you're on an older MacBook that has multiple USB ports on it, it's always best to plug into the port that's closest to your power. The rest of the ports kind of daisy chain off of that port, so you always want to go into the primary one. And again, it's best not to be running any other peripherals at the time, because you want all the bandwidth and all the power that can flow across this line dedicated to your capture and your camera. And the USB 3 is a fantastic protocol for transferring all of this data.